The latest Hamas attack on Israel has been labeled correctly as Israel's 9/11. Some others say the surprise attack by Hamas represents a shattering Israeli intelligence failure, so it is more like Pearl Harbor. Some argue that it is far worse than 9/11. According to retired Gen. David Petraeus, who commanded America's wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, as horrific as 9/11 was, the October 7th attack on Israel killed a far greater proportion of its much smaller population. Petraeus said, "This is the equivalent of the U.S. having experienced over 40,000 losses, rather than the 3,000 terrible losses that we sustained in the attacks of 9/11. That is the reason why many people describe the attack as a combination of 9/11 and Pearl Harbor." After the incident, Western countries all condemn Hamas's terrorist actions, but China remains equivocal, making China's role remarkable. A Hamas spokesman said the attack was directly supported by Iran. A White House official told the BBC that Hamas was definitely funded and armed by Iran. According to the U.S. State Department, Iran provides more than $100 million in funding to the Gaza Strip each year, so why does Iran have support to sponsor weapons for Hamas? China and Iran signed a military cooperation agreement in 2021. Although Iran is subject to U.S. sanctions, China signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran at the fourth level of the Chinese Communist Party's diplomatic system. The relationship between China and Iran is extraordinary. In 2021, when the country signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation plan agreement with Iran in energy security in other fields, China also invested billions of dollars to strengthen military and security cooperation between the two countries. In February 2023, Iran's president visited China and held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. In March 2023, the Chinese Communist Party pushed Iran's old enemy Saudi Arabia to resume diplomatic ties with Iran, which China officially presents as a responsible power. After Hamas suddenly violently attacked Israel, Iran was the first country to support it. Yehia Rahim Safavi, a top military advisor to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, says the Islamic Republic supports Hamas' Al-Aqsa Storm operation against Israel. Notably, for days before the surprise attack on Israel, Ali Khamenei's English Twitter declared, "The Zionist regime is dying." Jason Brodsky, a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, said commanders of Hamas and Iran's Revolutionary Guard held a meeting in Lebanon in September. He said this provided some clues about the group responsible for the latest attacks on Israel. Jonathan Schnausser, senior vice president for research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a Washington-based think tank, believed Iran is involved in the incident. U.S.-based former PLA Navy Lieutenant Col Yao-cheng said that Russia most likely does not support Hamas because 1/5 of more than 5 million Israelis are Russian. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Israel did not condemn it. In recent years, relations between Israel and neighboring Arab countries have also improved but are still in a state of tension with Syria, Lebanon and Iran, while China has many weapons transactions with Iran and has recently continued to solemnly welcome the Syrian president at the Asian Games. According to Yao Cheng, the U.S. is most concerned about Israel's safety and cannot stand still, so China is the biggest suspect in this war. China's move is killing two birds with one stone. It not only relieves President Putin's pressure but also distracts the U.S. military's attention from China in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. If this causes a sixth Middle East war, China will incite Pyongyang to cause trouble immediately, coincidentally just as the Taiwan and U.S. presidential elections are approaching. Will the U.S. let China, Russia, and Iran dictate the world order? Saudi Arabia and Israel are planning to establish diplomatic relations that will open up the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy and the Indian Middle East European corridor strategy. This will greatly disadvantage the Eurasian Axis alliance led by China, Russia, and Iran. China has an interest in causing this conflict, and it is possible that it indirectly finances Hamas. Although China is not directly involved in planning and running the conflict, its ambition is to find a side agent to wage a proxy war. Beijing puts on the face of a peace messenger for wars around the world, including Russia-Ukraine and now possibly Palestine and Israel, but the side that the world does not see is that it is engaged in a proxy war as it appears as a power that enjoys international prestige while also looking good as the mediator. However, Israel and the U.S. are now carefully evaluating the conflict, should we escalate the situation of invading the Gaza Strip, completely eliminating Hamas? But escalating at this time may not be beneficial to Israel because of the failure of Israel's Mossad intelligence agency and the contradictions. The country's increasingly profound internal judicial reform has revealed many problems that need to be resolved. The world needs to know the final boss of terrorism. After September 11, the U.S. deployed a war on terrorism globally, leading to the fall of the Islamic government of Afghanistan and the dictatorial government of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Since then, the public has become familiar with the concept of terrorism and its representatives such as Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. But very few people know that terrorism has close ties with the Chinese Communist Party. In 2018, the editorial team of 9 commentaries on the Communist Party at the Epoch Times published the book, How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World. In Chapter 15 titled, The Communist Roots of Terrorism, readers are given a more direct view of terrorism. The Chinese Communist Party has long supported terrorist activities abroad, including the terrorist attacks of Palestinian terrorist leader Yasser Arafat when it sponsored the hijacking of commercial airliners. Arafat targeted the U.S. and became an example for Osama bin Laden later in the 9/11 incident. In 1959, Arafat influenced the Palestinian National Liberation Movement called Fatah. In November 1988, the Palestinian state was established. Until his death in 2004, he remained the leader of Palestinian armed organizations. Arafat is a Middle Eastern figure whom the Chinese Communist Party is very fond of. He went to China 14 times and met with most of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party during their terms, including Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, and Jiang Zemin. In addition to providing weapons and financial aid, Beijing also regularly instructs Palestine to wage war with the US and Israel, and how to expand its international influence. The Chinese Communist Party also invited Palestinians to China for training. In January 1965, Arafat used guerrilla squads to wage war against Israel in northern Palestine. In May 1965, the Palestinian Liberation Organization PLO set up an office in Beijing. China has broken the rules for this office to enjoy diplomatic treatment and openly support the PLO in international events. In November 1988, the 19th session of the Palestinian National Council declared independence for the Palestinian state, which Beijing immediately acknowledged, and on November 20 of the same year, diplomatic relations with Palestine were established. This may be the source of the Chinese Communist Party's ambiguous response to Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7. From 2000 to 2001, Arafat and then General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, Jiang Zemin, visited each other. During this time, large-scale bloody conflicts broke out in Palestine and Israel. Israel repeatedly criticized Arafat as the ringleader in this violence. Under the support of the Chinese Communist Party, Arafat fended off the US and Israel while causing constant chaos in the Middle East. The US and Israel have always believed that Arafat was behind many terrorist attacks in the Middle East. The White House designated Fatah and the PLO as terrorist organizations and closed the Palestinian Information Office in 1987. The Chinese Communist Party had extensive contacts with Al-Qaeda, beginning a covert communist regime, cooperated with Taliban rebels to shelter bin Laden. In 1980, in addition to sending 300 military advisors to the military base of the jihadi warriors in Afghanistan, China also opened military training camps in Xinjiang to teach how to use weapons, fighting strategies, propaganda techniques and espionage warfare. Xinjiang became a training base for the Afghan Holy War Organization to fight the Soviet Union. By the time the Soviet Union withdrew its troops from Afghanistan, the Chinese army had trained at least several thousand jihadists to provide them with machine guns, rocket launchers as well as surface-to-air ballistic missiles worth a total of $2 to $4 billion. After the Taliban took power in Afghanistan as well as the period when the Taliban sheltered bin Laden, the Chinese Communist Party always maintained secret relations with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Even though Al-Qaeda launched a terrorist attack on the U.S. Embassy and U.S. Navy and the Taliban still refused to hand over bin Laden to the United Nations, the Chinese Communist Party has always opposed the UN sanctions against the Taliban. In 1998, the U.S. used cruise missiles to attack Al-Qaeda's bases. the Chinese government offered $10 million for al-Qaeda to buy unexploded ballistic missiles from the US to improve their technology. At the same time, China continues to provide sensitive military technology to countries that sponsor terrorism. At the end of 2000, the United Nations Security Council proposed sanctions against the Taliban to force the Taliban to close the bin Laden terrorist training camp on its territory, but China abstained. Then China continued to secretly negotiate with the Taliban and reached an agreement for Huawei to help the Taliban build a widespread military communications system throughout Afghanistan. On the day of the September 11 attacks, China and Taliban officials signed a deal expanding economic and scientific and technical cooperation. What makes people shocked is that after the 9/11 incident, 2 Chinese military officers were hailed as heroes because they were the authors of a book called Unlimited War, published in 1999. In the book, they came up with the idea that if the New York World Trade Center was attacked, it would push the US into a very complicated dilemma. These 2 authors also call al-Qaeda an organization with the capacity to organize such actions. That is enough to say that China's idea of unlimited war has provided the guiding theory for bin Laden's later activities. After the 9/11 incident, when the United Nations Security Council imposed long sanctions on the Taliban government, China not only abstained but also sent 2 military officers to support the Taliban immediately after the invasion. American teams begin airstrikes in Afghanistan. It was also after September 11 that U.S. intelligence agencies discovered that ZTE and Huawei, 2 technology companies linked to the Chinese military, were helping the Taliban establish a mobile phone network in the capital of Afghanistan. In 2004, it was revealed that Chinese intelligence agencies had used disguised companies to help bin Laden raise funds and launder money in financial markets around the world. Don't forget to comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from Understand China, and thank you for tuning in.